Welcome to this week's Bite Size, a shortened, revised and revisited version of the F-Word Bite Size that we launched back in August. The fact that the original F-Word Bite Size was number 9 in our recent Pick of the Pops countdown of the most popular bite size indicates that we already see feedback as important and something we want to learn about and get better at giving and receiving. You may remember that we explained the reason the bite size was called the F-Word was because we thought it was a bleeping shame that there was a special word for these types of conversations. That special word makes them different, unusual or special, rather than normal, familiar and everyday. Some recent conversations about people's experience of the redeployment process and as part of the reverse mentoring conversation suggest we still have some work to do. The feedback was about thanking people and the importance when we do of showing them the difference their actions made and giving them insight into the impact their actions had. With that in mind, we wanted to revisit the best practice principles when giving feedback and re-highlight the DESK model as a simple and straightforward structure for planning and delivering effective feedback, whether affirmative or developmental. When giving feedback effectively, principles include that it's regular, frequent and ongoing. So it's not something rare, different and concerning. It's something that we all do all of the time with everybody about everything. And so eventually we'll avoid the F-word reaction. It's sincere and honest. Our reputation and our integrity, a key deposit in the trust bank that we explored in the Building and Maintaining Trust Bite Size, relies on us being open, honest and respectful to those we're offering feedback to. It includes examples highlighting specific behaviour observed, ideally by us, and allows the receiver to recognise and place our feedback in context, making it more understandable and therefore more likely to be acted on. It describes the impact, so the benefits or consequences of the behaviour. Hearing the impact of the behaviour supports the receiver to understand the reason the feedback is being offered, so it makes sense to them and they can make a more informed choice about whether or not they take action. It's timely, ensuring the feedback is shared as close to the event as practical, close enough that the receiver can remember the situation and behaviour being referred to, and far enough away for us both to be calm about it. Its own, so make sure where we can it's our own feedback. Steer clear of things like the organisation wants you to know or it's been brought to my attention that, and focus on I statements, so I noticed, or what I saw, or what I heard. And finally, that it's concise. There seems to be an inverse relationship between the number of words we use and the impact that we have. The more we say, the less impact we're likely to achieve. So be concise to be impactful. Other things it's useful for us to consider, particularly if we're giving developmental feedback, are ensuring that it's future orientated. It describes what we want to have happen going forward rather than what we don't want repeated from the past. Notice the difference between your presentation last week was so long-winded, you really lost the audience when you got into the statistics. This has the potential to be perceived as criticism, so when you compare it with, for your next presentation, it'd be great to see you focus on the strategy rather than the detailed statistics to keep the attention of the audience right until the end, which is much more likely to feel like a supportive comment. Also, we want it to be descriptive rather than judgmental. So it describes the behaviour observed rather than the person. So again, notice the difference between, I noticed that I didn't receive the update from you that you'd promised, which is really descriptive, compared to, no update, no surprise, you always let me down, you're just not committed, which is much more clearly judgmental. And finally, that it's shared in private. Out of respect for the individual and to avoid damaging the strength of our relationship with them, in the vast majority of cases it's useful to make sure we have these developmental conversations in private. Now, for our feedback to be as effective and influential as possible, it's useful to incorporate the best practice principles within a structure which will support us to both prepare and deliver our feedback. And you can see from this slide there's a whole variety of models available, and it's about us finding the one that works for us. One we'd like to highlight or to remind you of if you've been through some of the real modules or done any of our real e-learning, is the DESK model. DESK is a simple and straightforward structure for planning and delivering effective feedback, whether it's affirmative, so a positive reinforcement of behaviours and performance with the intention of the recipient feeling supported to continue working in that way, so you might describe that as praise, or developmental, so highlighting an area where an improvement in performance or behaviour is required or would be desirable. It supports us to describe the behaviour and the effect and implications of a particular event so that the receiver can identify specifically when it happened and understand what needs to be changed or repeated. It also includes the reasons so they can make a more informed choice about whether they want to take action to be more effective in their performance. Let's explore DESK one element at a time. D stands for describe. This is about the general situation event, so effectively taking them back to the time, directing their memory and attention to the situation we want to talk about. E is about expressing how we felt and being really clear, not you made me feel, much more about taking full ownership for our feelings. So I was surprised, or I felt concerned, or I was impressed. Finding the right word for how you feel is really important. It improves congruence in our message. You might want to revisit the feelings wheel in the psychological transition bite size for a range of feelings options. S stands for specifics, giving descriptive examples of the behaviour. So specifically what was said or done, so in terms of the language used, the actions taken, as well as how it was said or done, so the tone of voice or body language, etc. And finally, the consequences or impact. In its purest sense, this is about the impact if this behaviour continues for the individual, the team, or the patient. It can also be used in a broader range of ways, including saying thank you or linking to a conversation by asking an open question. Planning and structuring our feedback also means that we're clear about the change we want to influence before we give it. Or as Kevin Eikenberry says, better feedback starts with a clear intention. Let's look at some examples to bring it even more to life. Let's look first at an example of developmental feedback. I wanted to have a conversation with you about handover this morning when we were discussing Mrs. Price. I was concerned when Andy was talking about her visit. You started speaking before she'd finished, saying, yeah, but you weren't really finished because you didn't do your System 1 notes, and the volume of your voice was louder than hers, which meant that the rest of the team couldn't hear what she said, and we then had to rush through the last couple of patients because she had to repeat it. In future, please wait until someone else has finished speaking before you contribute, and if you have concerns about someone else's work, please raise them one-to-one rather than in a handover. What do you think about what I've said? DESK will work equally well for an affirmative piece of feedback, so let's have a look at an example of that now. I wanted to have a conversation with you about the time you spent with us when you were redeployed with us from your clinic role. I was particularly grateful as your waiting list will have been impacted by the time you spent here, and I know that was on your mind. What made the most difference was your positive attitude and how quickly you picked up the tasks we gave you. You dived right into supporting the team and handled every task and call bell with grace and diligence. Having you working with us was like a breath of fresh air. It gave us a much needed burst of energy to keep going and supported us in being able to care for our patients at a time when they really needed it. Thank you, we really appreciated it and couldn't have done it without you. The purpose of giving feedback is to generate a repetition or a change in behaviour, remembering that the receiver always has a choice about whether or not they take action as a result. So us being structured, concise, specific and clear with the feedback we offer increases the chances of it being both heard and acted on. So let's look at the takeaways from this bite size. In an ideal world, we won't need the F word because these types of conversations will become commonplace and valued. Effective feedback follows the best practice principles and clearly describes the impact. And DESK supports us in planning and delivering feedback effectively. So let's look at some actions we can take. Think about which elements of feedback you already do well when giving or when receiving. Think about the first element of feedback you will work on to improve. what one action you will take today that will begin that development, and who the first person that you will try out your improved feedback skills with will be. As usual, here's a link to all of the other supports available to all of us as we go through the pandemic, and a request for any feedback on these bite size, if it can be sent to the lead team email address you can see at the bottom of the slide there. I look forward to working with you on another bite size.